current AI reasoning models, even with a cool harness around them, they can help. They can augment the humans, but they can't detect the advanced attacks.
Everyone is talking about AI making defenders more productive, but do you think that it's just helping the offensive side, the attackers, simply just become faster?
Yes, faster and more intelligent.
I experienced a deepfake that came into our business through inbound, and I was completely blindsided by it. And once we ran them through our compliance, we realized very quickly that the individual that we spoke to wasn't even a member of the business that they were claiming to be. Global cybersecurity spending is now well into the hundreds of billions a year. Yet ransomware breaches and nation state attacks seem to be getting worse every year. Are we actually just getting more secure, or have we simply become just better at spending money?
We have become better at spending money, I'm afraid. And there's the theater of cyber.
Evan, global cybersecurity spending is now well into the hundreds of billions a year in terms of spend. Yet ransomware breaches and nation state attacks seem to be getting worse every year. Are we actually just getting more secure, or have we simply become just better at spending money?
Oh, this is a great question. We have become better at spending money, I'm afraid. And there's the theater of cyber, which have investors who split the world into two. Organizations where they basically need to check the boxes, and that's sort of the theater of cyber. Can't get fired if I do this. I bought the right products. Then there are those organizations where no, actually the power will go off, the water will be poisoned, the nation will be compromised if we get hacked. And there are actually two different markets masquerading as one. So we have, unfortunately, we're spending more and more, and in some ways falling further behind.
It's interesting to think about it, because now with AI, there's just a plethora more threats in the market. I mean, I just recently, I experienced a deepfake that came into our business through inbound, and I was completely blindsided by it. And I realized really quickly, it's everywhere. So what I mean by that is we had an inbound come through from a potential customer, brand new customer, never heard of them. But we followed up, we had the conversation. And once we ran them through our compliance, we realized very quickly that the individual that we spoke to wasn't even a member of the business that they were claiming to be. So thankfully, we've got a lot of protections in place, but there are many companies that don't have that, and there are many individuals in the market, whether they're consumer facing or B2B, whatever the matter might be. The threats are increasing with AI. How do you feel about how AI is creating, whether it's an opportunity for cybersecurity or more potential downside?
Today, it's more downside, and I think an important fact to recognize is that sort of the giants of the industry that built this industry built it on looking at signatures. So finding out how an attacker likes to attack or attackers like to attack, and then really through a whole ecosystem, enabling defenders to build these signature-based detections to prevent those attacks. That ecosystem, that pipeline from we're seeing this behavior to I've now protected myself would take weeks, let's say. To get that intelligence across the whole cyber ecosystem and get that signature on the perimeter, helping defend you. And we now have seconds, or maybe negative time. So bear with me. What do I mean by negative time? Well, if you have now on the front end of your attacks intelligence, i.e. models, maybe a distilled version of Claude, or a Chinese open source version of Claude helping you make this attack, you can go try to find novel vulnerabilities in that customer. So ones that they may not even know they have, let alone they haven't built a detection to see if you've exploited it yet. So so now the industry we've set up requires a lead time between attack patterns or TTPs or IOCs and defense of weeks or something, and we have negative time now. So it's not good. It's not good. We have a backward-looking, fundamentally industry, and we have innovative attackers. And slapping some AI on the defense alone won't get us there, I'm afraid.
That's really peculiar. I think about what you just said there, and I wonder, it sounds as if you're saying that cybersecurity industry is outdated when you think about the AI movement and the attackers. Cyber wasn't ready for this.
Cyber wasn't ready for this. And today, literally, as we record this in June, so in the last week or two, I was in DC and New York, but there's a National Academy of Sciences report that's just come out from the US. So, they're all august and brilliant, I guess, PhDs, pointing out what we're all feeling now every day. Even the NSA and the Five Eyes agencies came out, and they both said, and others, NIST in the United States has said, you need to do something called anomaly detection to be able to observe, novel attacks, right? Again, if you have negative time to prepare a signature-based detection, that doesn't work. So you need to look at everything that is strange and do it efficiently. And we've been beating on this drum, as we would at DeepTempo, given the technology we build, for years. And I can tell you, when I started this company, the amount of very smart, accomplished, even sort of billionaires in the cyberspace who have said, yeah, but will AI really ever be used for attacks? Like, of course it will. It's like, come on, if we're using it to code, they're basically coding. They have nothing to lose. They only have to get it right once, right? A bug in their world, who cares? So they don't get in that time. So they were early adopters, as of course they would have been. So yeah, we are a bit behind. But again, the incentive structure in cyber, I do think it's a bit of a bifurcated industry where you have some folks who, they can't be popped, period. Absolutely. They think typically from first principles about these matters. And then you've got folks who just don't want to get fired. I've checked the boxes. It's not on me. And that's fine too. We can't all be first principles thinkers thinking through, the chess match here. We're definitely exposed, maybe for good reason. Cyber is security conscious, so it moves slowly. But today, and it's not just because of AI, but when you're moving towards a more real-time environment, we saw this in the DevOps world over the last, say, 15 years. Things change. You have to have this system mindset, and it's tricky to get the humans increasingly out of the loop. It's non-trivial.
What makes you believe the industry is structurally broken rather than perhaps simply going through another technology transition?
Well, the two are related, right? A big enough disruption, and you do have the innovator's dilemma, or I tend to go back to, Thomas Kuhn wrote, The Theory of Scientific Revolutions. The wrong questions are asked. They're the right questions, right? Until suddenly someone comes along and says, asks a different question, and you stop thinking, the Earth is at the center of the solar system, right? It's like, oh, no, actually, now that you look at it that way, it's not. And so it's the right thing to do. That's the innovator's dilemma. The incentives are set up to do something that makes sense in the short term, that leaves you exposed in the medium to long term. And I think that's what we're wrestling with.
Evan, when you walk around RSA, for example, and see thousands of vendors with enormous marketing budgets, what do you think most people are missing about the state of cybersecurity today?
I think I'm a fairly mellow person, but it angers me, frankly. And I love marketing. Don't get me wrong. I'm proud to market. But I think the symptom that these big booths, et cetera, it's more than the booths. It's custom, scotch for you, Mr. C or CISO. Like, really? It's custom, kicks, tennis shoes, all of this stuff. It's the expensive steak dinners. It's, flying you to F1. It might even be buying part of an F1 team. Sorry, shots fired. But all of these things suggest you're selling top down through semi-technical, super overwhelmed CISOs. And that is a recipe for getting good check boxes checked, but it's not a recipe for system level thinking. And it's not a recipe for the practitioners actually having a vote. So we're big believers in open source. I mean, we do support Vigil, which is the leading open source AI SOC. And we're getting an enormous amount of pull from the folks actually trying to do the job. But traditionally in DevOps, if you read sort of the manifestos in the old DevOps world, one of the, ye shall nots is, ye shall not mandate to your team what technology they use. You, Mr. CIO or business CIO, listen to the practitioners, adopt from the ground up. Generally we do the opposite. RSA, to your point, or RSAC, or all of the madness around Black Hat in Vegas. It's very symptomatic of that. We're spending massive budgets to convince CISOs to adopt us, and it's a big reason why we are where we are.
We've spoken about this, you and I, on our first call. You made a comment that really struck with me, and I wrote it down. You said cybersecurity was already losing before AI, and AI just accelerated the attacker's advantage. So what does that actually look like over the next 5 years in your opinion? I know we can't predict these things, right? I mean, the market is moving so fast that you alluded to the fact that we're recording this in June of 2026. As an executive in the business, you've built companies, you've scaled companies. How do you see this evolving?
I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. That said, some of the reports we talked about, I was in this closed door session in DC last week before last, I guess. There's real concern, awareness, Senate staffers and intel agencies. So there's a tremendous focus on this as a national security problem. And so I believe in the folks who are trying to push us to being more rational. But it takes a little bit more curiosity than we've shown, I think, so far. Just as for instance, we had somebody at one of these talks, they're a policy person for one of the big labs, either OpenAI or Anthropic, but say like, oh, AI is just as good for defense as it is for offense. It's just not so, right? Now, our flavor at DeepTempo, we've built a little tiny model that is wonderful at seeing advanced attacks. But if you throw these attacks into a reasoning model and hope it to tell you what's happening, it's a recipe for massive costs. Now, if you look at SOC Bench, which is an open source project we started, and anyone can take it out for a drive, it would cost you, poor accuracy, high latency, all of those things if you rely on LLMs for detection, but also at the volume we're operating at in a big telco, more than $1 billion a day. So it's just not so that current AI reasoning models, even with a cool harness around them, they can help. They can augment the humans, but they can't detect the advanced attacks. And until we double click and show the curiosity to understand that, we're going to waste more time and money. Maybe we'll get some cool bottles of scotch from our vendors or whatever the case may be, but we won't better defend our organizations.
Everyone is talking about AI making defenders more productive, but do you think that it's just helping the offensive side, the attackers, simply just become faster?
Yes, faster and more intelligent. So in the defender side, we work with, for example, organization that's national infrastructure type, and they do threat hunts. And long story short, every one of those hunts needs to be attributable down to a human. And I just wrote a blog about this, but it's just, I'm in favor of using AI for defense, both for workflow and for detections. And there's two different flavors of AI you need. But on the workflow side, at least in many environments, if you can't attribute down to the human who took that threat hunt action, and then even, of course, who turned off the lights in this area because of that threat hunt, you just can't put it into prod. So we still have these fundamental, and that's not something we do, but that non-human identity tagging is still missing there. So yeah, meanwhile, the attackers have the incentive, they have the funding, right? They're pulling out of the economies, north of $1 trillion a year, most of which presumably they're using in not to invest in new tech, right? But other ways, whatever they do with that money. But they do have a lot of money and the wherewithal to ramp up attacks.
There's opportunities in the market from an investment standpoint, from a venture perspective. There's also the CIOs and the CISOs in big enterprise Fortune 500 that are trying to solve for these big problems to protect their businesses. I think there's also an element of fear, but also an element of the fear of missing out. And we'll talk about your company. I'd love to unpack that. But just firstly, when you're speaking to customers or when your team is speaking to customers, how do you differentiate yourself from the noise? That whole signal to noise ratio, how do you differentiate yourself? How do you take away the fear, but also solve a problem that they can understand rather than, as you said, be one of those other vendors in the market who are just spending a lot of time on marketing and not really solving something?
You've got to tie yourself to results to the extent possible. So, in our case, we basically offer to come in at no or little cost and find the bad looking back and do that in such a way that we're super on the hook, right? And the efficacy is very transparent to them. So you have to take, and that's another reason for the open source, right? We're not saying try this out and like, here it is. When you try it out, you're going to have your experience. You're going to communicate with people in the open on the internet about your experience. And so you've got to try to be uncomfortably transparent and tie yourself at the mast to outcomes. But it's non-trivial. It's a very, very noisy environment, as you know.
Yeah.
I join great podcasts. That's what I do to try to get awareness. Yeah.
I appreciate that. Evan, let's talk about your company today. I guess just start off with, tell us about the company and the problem that you're solving.
So X years ago, there I was as a experienced entrepreneur. I am now the gray beard I used to have to hire when I was starting companies 20 plus years ago with a clean sheet of paper and imagining the future. At the time, I was taking grad level comp sci courses at Stanford to try to get my hands on keyboard around what is this AI wave coming, and imagine a future not unlike that of today where attackers are using AI. So rather than immediately running towards, hey, let's use AI, I thought, well, what if the bad guys do? And that led us down the path of building what is now, we believe, the state-of-the-art solution for identifying hard-to-discern attacks. We call it a LogLM. So purpose-built, pre-trained on logs. Our AI never got to read Shakespeare or anything else on the internet. It only got to read logs. It's very, very good with low false positives at seeing attacks. And then more recently, we've added an open source project called Vigil, which is getting a lot of attention, couple hundred new users, it seems, a day. That is an open source AI SOC. And put together, we think we harness the right flavor of AI for the right problem space. Don't try to use Claude to detect attacks in millions of events a minute. It's not going to do a great job. That's where something like a LogLM can help. Do use Claude with some open source to actually respond to get the human productivity up massively. And that's what Vigil does. And so that's us. Historically, it's been BNY, as a reference design partner, telco, national government types, but now we're working with MSSPs and really trying to get the tech and the outcomes out in the hands of thousands, tens of thousands of users.
What's a typical use case?
It's either reactive or proactive. So reactive is very much the I get a ping. I'm a telco, or I'm a critical infrastructure provider. I'm a bank, and I get informed that there might be a particular flavor of fox in your henhouse, and I've got to, as quickly as possible, go try to discern whether that exists, and I have to document it because the regulators will want to know, et cetera. And so the volume of those searches is going up by an order of magnitude or more. I mean, literally in the last couple of months, one of the users has gone up by 20x the amount of these searches they need to make. So that's kind of reactive. So the workflow is the open source Vigil, but the actual making sense out of a petabyte of logs quickly to see if that if the fox left footprints, that's the LogLM. But then we say, why don't you just run the LogLM forever, right? And so it'll tell you if these footprints look like a fox. And so it's those two use cases writ large. So it's threat identification, threat response, in large noisy environments.
Nice. Evan, I want to take it a little bit away from the cybersecurity world for a second and away from the AI world as well. Building companies today, as a founder, as a CEO, as an executive, as somebody who's done this over and over again, I hear a lot that this is a great time to build a company. Have the landscapes changed? Has the story, the narrative changed in terms of how you get funding, how you build a company, how you get customers? Has competition changed? What does it look like in today's market?
I think it's changed. Now we're bringing a very old playbook, right? We're a deep tech company, and so which is kind of traditionally the basis of, I would argue, where I am, Silicon Valley here. So from that standpoint, a lot of the old lessons that we learned about about finding those early adopters and crossing the chasm, still apply. But on the other hand, you do see, thanks to folks building on top of AI, just a massive explosion of innovations. And so the noise, I think, is even higher. Maybe the most important thing is the democratization of software. It's unlocked us in ways, and I'm super excited about that. I mean, if AI stopped today, we would still be living in a world in which anyone can write some pretty good code. And that's going to have, I think, positive. It's having negative on this because cyber attackers use that. I think it's going to have positive impacts for a generation. So I'm pretty excited about that. So it is a golden age. Absolutely, it's a golden age. Our playbook's pretty similar to the old one in the sense that, we're such a deep tech company, but it's fun. It's a really fun time to build.
I love it. I have one perhaps controversial question to ask, and it's one that I'd like to ask a lot of founders is, if most of these companies in today's market are building on the LLMs that exist, and then the LLMs are switched off, as we saw more recently. I mean, I try to keep these episodes as timeless as possible, but there are naturally avenues where, whether it's government or for good reason, would stop certain technologies from working within the AI world. And you think all these businesses are dependent on these LLMs to function in a certain way. Does that worry you? Does that whether it's for your company or the opportunity that exists in the market today, that anybody can actually go out there and use software to code and build technology and build products. But if these products and these companies are built and dependent on certain LLMs, whether it's Anthropic, etc., and these LLMs are switched off, these models are switched off, does that worry you?
It does. And again, it's one reason, what is it? Horses for courses, right? I remember. So, open source we think is really important, and the ability to use different models easily, and not to be wrapped up in the wrapping of your proprietary vendor who's wrapping around these LLMs. I mean, it's much better to know, oh yeah, I checked in the markdown, which is the skills over here, and I can apply that to another LLM. In fact, as a background task, I should be constantly verifying that if I need to, I can fall back to Kimmy, right? Because we all know in cybersecurity, good news, we have these open source models from China that we can trust. Anyway, at least in DC, that elicits laughs. But so I think it's really important to be aware of this and the ability to deploy on-prem in your environment in sovereign AI. We are running a couple spots in the Middle East as an example where this is super top of mind. And the other model of, even if it helped you make enough money to buy into an F1 team, where you pull back your log data to some central US company and it tells you whether you're being attacked, that makes a lot of the world a little bit nervous. So better to put the intelligence with your data, partnering with a Cribble or whomever, whatever vendor, but and better to have open source wrapped around the intelligence as opposed to hiding the intelligence and proprietary. It's a big question. We get it a lot, but we would, because we're more attuned. We vibe with the sovereign AI people. But I do think it's important.
Yeah, I think the reason I asked this question is because we've seen this, right, more recently, and it's amazing. Anthropic, OpenAI releases a new model, and it's amazing. It's going to increase our capacity. We can do more, we can be more complex with what we're building, but we can wake up the next day and if we built an entire product on that model, it gets switched off. That's our business, right?
And well, you have the opposite challenge too, right? Where you're Adobe, hey, we're using Anthropic's Claude internally, and they're great, and oh, they just launched design, or and so here they come. Yeah.
Evan, it's so fascinating, and I'd love to do part 2 to this episode where we can dive into more important things around cybersecurity and how your business is going to grow over the next 6 to 12 months. It's exciting what you're building. I wish we had more time on these podcasts. I want to wrap up with one final question, which is a question we ask every single guest, and it's all about education on this podcast. It's why we called it Inside the Silicon Mind, and part of being on Inside the Silicon Mind is understanding how our guests think about the future, and part of that is reading. I tell my team at Harrison Clark all the time, read more books. It's the best way. I feel like reading now is more important than ever because it's the fear of atrophy. Because if we're so dependent on these AIs, what would happen if we're just, everything we do is let's just put it on AI, or let's put it in ChatGPT or Perplexity or what have you. I can talk about this for days, but a book recommendation. I'd love to get one from you, Evan.
Okay. I mentioned one, which is an oldie but a goodie, which is I think it's called Theory of Scientific Revolutions, which can seem a bit arcane, but Thomas Kuhn, or of course the sort of popularized one is Innovator's Dilemma. It's basically the same argument, but but authored by a business school PhD. So it's one. Recently, though, I've been reading, and there's a bunch of these, but it's called On Focus, and it's by a Buddhist monk, and just but it's tricky, right? So it's all of the, I'm no expert at it, but all of the mindfulness techniques, etc. So that's the trick in today's. And it, in a way, almost gets worse the more successful your company is, right? There's more opportunities now. So how can you kind of be at peace? It's tricky, but there's a number of these books on how to focus and mindfulness that I would recommend. And if nothing else, you're focused during the time you're reading the book about how to focus. So,
it's why I try to read in quiet, because I can't focus otherwise. I want to ask you about that, actually, Evan. You've built companies. You're building a company today. How important are these techniques? Because it's easy to get distracted, especially now, as you said. It is a golden age. There's a plethora of opportunities to build more things. How do you stay focused?
We tie ourselves to the mast of a problem and a desired outcome from a user, because literally when we're planning a sprint, which we are, it seems like all the time. So what do we do the next 2-3 weeks? It's okay. We have this problem, this user or customer. Let's nail that, and it kind of forces us to come together. But it also somehow eases my mind a bit, right? Because it's sometimes hard to know if you're making progress. But if you go from a customer who's like, yeah, this is good, to being able to handle 20 times more threat hunts in a given window, that's a great outcome. And so that's one way. I think fitness, not that I'm super fit, although I do try to go running back there. That's Bedwell Park in the Bay Area over my shoulder. It's a good question, but you have to know how hard to burn it, because we're probably doing 90-hour weeks, right? But how can you be alive to the moment and not, if I burn myself out, I'm a leader, right? Sorry to use that word. So how do I push it without burning myself out? I try to get outside, try to read, those sorts of things. But again, tie myself to the mast of a particular problem for a particular user, and see if we can win at that.
I love it. Evan, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on Inside Silicon Mind. I look forward to doing this again.
Likewise. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Inside the Silicon Mind. This podcast is powered by Harrison Clark. For more episodes, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. As always, stay curious, stay consistent, and stay inside the Silicon Mind.